Hi, this is Vivian Vande Velde. I am here to read you another story as you and I and a whole bunch of other people in this country are forced to stay home, which is a safe thing to do in this time of coronavirus. I'm going to read you a story from a collection of mine called Tales from the Brothers Grimm and Sisters Weird. That was a hardcover. This is how it looked when it came out in paperback. Last time I talked to you about one of the reasons why there could be a difference between a hardcover cover and the paperback cover, and that was the different audience that it's meant to appeal to. The hardcover being meant for the adults, for the parents and teachers and librarians, whereas the paperback is more meant to have the kids pick it up and say, oh, this looks good, I want to read this. But there's another reason, and that can be the editor's decision because a book has been out a long time and might look dated. So this book came out in the 1980s, and then in the 21st century, they decided that it needed the look to be updated. But the story is the same, and I am going to read to you from the hardcover just because that's easier to hold on to. Title is Frog, and these are all, by the way, in case you couldn't tell from the title, fractured fairy tales. Once upon a time, when princes still set out to seek their fortunes, and when cranky old women still sometimes turned out to be witches, a prince named Sidney came to a well where an old woman asked him for help in getting water. Now the old woman didn't have a bucket, and Sidney didn't have a bucket, but he'd heard enough fairy tales about three sons setting off down the road and meeting a strange old woman, and the first two sons were always rude and got into trouble, and the youngest son was always polite, and then the old woman would give him whatever it was that he needed to fulfill his quest. So, being a middle son, Sidney always did his best to be polite to everybody, even when he wasn't on a quest. But his best wasn't enough for this old woman, and the next thing he knew, he was a bulgy-eyed green frog, which just goes to show that sometimes having a bucket is more important than being polite. There, you loathsome thing, the old woman said, which was hardly fair since she was the one who had made him into what he was. Stay a frog until a beautiful princess feeds you from her plate and lets you sleep on her pillow. Travel goes a lot faster when you're riding a horse than when you're hopping, especially if your feet are less than a foot long. It took several days for Sidney to find the nearest castle, and when he got there, he didn't even know whose castle it was. Everything looked different from grass level, but he was still pretty sure he didn't know the people who lived here. He hoped there was a princess. Sidney hopped across the drawbridge and into the dusty courtyard. There were horses and dogs and chickens, people too, way, way high up, and lots of legs. Many of them were walking so fast that he knew he was in danger of getting stepped on. He saw a well in the courtyard, but Sidney had had quite enough of wells for the time being. Hurriedly, he hopped off to the side, where there was a quiet and well-tended garden. In the garden was a lovely, cool-looking reflecting pool. Let me do that again. In the garden was a lovely, cool-looking reflecting pool with fresh, clear water and lily pads. Sidney jumped in, and it felt like heaven. Until something bonked him on the head and dunked him. Sidney came up sputtering, just as a beautiful girl of about his own age came running up to the pool. "Oh, no," the girl cried, "my golden ball!" "Excuse me," Sidney said, "are you a princess?" The girl didn't answer. She just flung herself onto the bench by the pool's edge and began to weep. Sidney, in the middle of the pool, looked down and could see the ball just settling into the soft mud below him. He paddled closer to the girl. "Excuse me," he said again, "are you a princess?" What a twit, the girl snapped, never even looking up. Of course I am. Don't I look like one? Yes, you do, Sydney admitted apologetically, and a very lovely one at that. I think the two of us can help each other out. I don't want to help you out, the princess said. I want to have my ball back. That's what I mean, Sydney said. The princess finally looked at him. You can get my ball? She asked. Sydney nodded. Well then, do it. Yes, Sydney said, but then afterward, will you let me eat from your plate and sleep on your pillow? I'm a prince, you see, and I have a magic spell on me, and that's the only way to break it. The princess's lip curled in disgust. I need that ball. It's my father's paperweight, and I wasn't supposed to be playing with it. I don't have to eat a lot from your plate, Sydney told her, and I can sleep way over on the side of the pillow and not take up much room at all. All right, the princess said. Sydney dove into the water. The ball was heavy, but with a great deal of struggling, he finally managed to get it up close enough that the princess could reach over and grasp it. As she turned the ball over in her hands to make sure it wasn't damaged, Sydney jumped up onto the bench next to her. Now, he said, just as she shook the water off the ball, drenching him all over again. He coughed a little bit, and when he looked up again, she was gone. Wait, he called, catching sight of her leaving the garden. But she didn't. By the time he made it out of the garden, across the courtyard, and into the castle, the princess was sitting down to dinner with her family. Sydney kicked on the dining room door. Hey, he yelled. Hey, princess! He heard the king ask. What's that noise? Nothing, the princess answered. Princess, Sydney yelled. It's me, the frog prince. You accidentally left me behind. The king's voice said, He says he's a frog prince. What does he mean, you left him behind? I don't know, the princess said. You promised you'd help me. Sydney wasn't used to yelling, and his throat was getting sore. You promised you'd help him? The king asked. No, the princess said. There was no other way. Sydney called out, In return for getting back your father's golden ball paperweight that you were playing with and dropped into the pool in the garden. The golden paperweight that left a wet spot on my papers this afternoon? The king asked. I don't know anything about it, the princess said. The king must have brought his fist down on the table. Sydney could hear the dishes rattle. A promise, the king said, is a promise. Let the frog in. Servants came and opened the big golden doors. Sydney hopped into the dining room, which was decorated with mirrors and crystal chandeliers and hundreds of flickering candles. He hopped until he came to the princess's chair. What exactly, the king asked his daughter, did you promise him? I can't remember, the princess said. That I could eat from your plate, Sydney reminded her. That I could sleep on your pillow. I promised not to eat too much and to use only the corner of the pillow. A promise is a promise, the king repeated. The princess lifted Sydney, not very gently, and plunked him down on the white linen tablecloth beside her china dish. Sydney nibbled on a piece of lettuce that was hanging off the edge of the dish. The princess put her napkin up to her mouth and made gagging sounds. I'm all finished, she announced, shoving the plate away. Then you may leave the table, the king said. Don't forget your little friend. The princess scooped up Sydney and brought him up the stairs to her bedroom, stamping her feet all the way. Thank you, Sydney yelled back down the stairs to the king. You horrid beast, the princess growled at Sydney. You told him about the paperweight. Now I'm going to be in trouble. It was your own fault for walking away so fast that I couldn't keep up, Sydney said. Are you going to put me on your pillow now? I'll put you on my pillow, the princess shouted, but I'll put you on my wall first. She flung Sydney with all her might against the wall. Ow! Sydney cried, landing in a heap on the floor. Now here's the pillow, the princess said, throwing that on top of him. But as soon as the pillow touched Sydney's head, he instantly regained his normal shape. Oh my, the princess gasped. She was going to be in serious trouble with her father now, she thought. Here she had a man in her room, and her father was never going to believe that this was the same person who had come into her room as a frog. Even now, she could hear her father coming up the stairs, demanding, What's all the commotion? But the prince, he was obviously a prince, who stood before her, was incredibly handsome, and she was falling in love already, which surely would balance out the trouble she'd be in with her father. "Oh," she said, clapping her hands together, "I'm so sorry. But my father will make it well worth your while. We can get married, and he'll give you half the kingdom, and—" "Are you out of your mind?" Sydney said. "First you break your promise to me, then you lie about it until your father forces you to keep it, then you try to kill me. No, thank you, princess." He strode out of the door, out of the castle, out of the kingdom, returning home, where he eventually married the goose girl. And her princess was right. Her father didn't believe her story. I hope you enjoyed Frog, which was originally published in Tales from the Brothers Grimm and the Sisters Weird by Harcourt, now known as Houghton Mifflin Harcourt. Stay healthy, stay safe, and be kind.